A personal goal which I have set myself in the course of this year is to once again read through the Bible. Now this, of course, includes the Old Testament and getting through books like Kings and Chronicles, books that talk about the various kings of Israel and Judah and the judgment that is made upon them depending on their relationship with God. One king, I guess you might say, is a favourite of mine and certainly is a good king, seen in a positive light, is Hezekiah. Sadly, at the end of his life, he ran into trouble because of pride. He was blessed greatly by God, but it went to his head. And so in the end, it wasn't as good as it had been at the start. As I was talking about Hezekiah, I was thinking about a personal life experience that I thought you may like to enjoy, because Hezekiah, as a king of Judah, oversaw the construction of a 533-metre long tunnel that went from the pool of Siloam to the spring of Gihon inside the walls of Jerusalem, so that if anybody was attacking from the outside, the inhabitants of the city had safe water. And on our last trip to Israel, I picked up a souvenir and I thought I'd share it with you this morning. So it says, "I survived Hezekiah's tunnel." Because you might imagine, it's underground, it's dark, it's not big, and sometimes you've got tight places where it's a bit hard to squeeze through. In fact, it's quite a feat of engineering, because the fellas that built the tunnel started on each end and they met in the middle. So you think back, this is over 700 years before Christ. Very, very significant achievement. And in fact, it wasn't until 1880 that archaeologists actually found the tunnel. In 2 Kings 18 and 19, we read the story of Hezekiah's refusal to surrender to the Assyrian army under Sennacherib. As well as verbal abuse, Hezekiah received a letter from Sennacherib's messengers ridiculing him and his people. Not only that, but they blasphemed God as well. And what did Hezekiah do? He took the letter that had been given to him and he took it into the temple. He spread it out before the Lord, effectively saying, "God, this is a situation for you to deal with." And the words are recorded for us in 2 Chronicles, where God says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army that is with him. For there is a greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." What wonderful words of comfort and assurance they must have been. The outcome, of course, if we're familiar with the story, is that the Lord sent an angel and 185,000 Assyrian soldiers were killed. And Sennacherib, following his defeat, returned to his home where he'd come from, and 2 of his sons assassinated him while he was in his temple worshipping his God. Because of his trust in and dependence upon God, Hezekiah and his people were spared. Perhaps if you're like me, as you read through the Bible, there are some pretty special stories that are extra meaningful for you. And one of the things that excites me is hearing stories of how God is still at work. And I think sometimes we can forget that, but God is a miracle-working God, and he is still very much active in the lives of people, answering our prayers. This morning, what I'm saying has a an American history flavour to it, because if we stop and think about it, today is the 4th of July over in the United States. Today is extra significant because it's 250 years since the American Declaration of Independence was first signed. The 13 colonies declaring their independence from Great Britain. And so what I am saying this morning has the title, In God We Trust. There are some familiar characters who were involved at this time, but one of the chief writers of the Declaration was Thomas Jefferson, the man who is credited as being the driving force behind the Declaration. Like many of his co-writers, Jefferson was a Christian, not unlike those who met to form part of the Australian Constitution back in 1901. And while the members of the Continental Congress adopted this statement on the 4th of July, its first public reading took place on July the 8th and was accompanied by the ringing of the Liberty Bell. In fact, when the bell was rung, it cracked, and you can see the crack there that's in the bell. And so as a tourist, you can go and actually touch the crack if that sort of does it for you. But anyway, that's the Liberty Bell. But what we don't realise often is that there is a biblical inscription on the bell, and it comes from Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 10, and it says, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." The importance of freedom and independence for the American colonists from Great Britain. The War of Independence went on for another 7 years until ultimately the British General Cornwallis surrendered. But that wasn't the end of the fighting between the two nations. There was the War of 1812. And in that particular war, the British bombarded Fort McHenry in what we know now as the city of Baltimore. And there was a poet around that particular time, Francis Scott Key, who was so moved to see the American flag flying after 25 hours of constant bombardment that he wrote as the Star-Spangled Banner, the American national anthem. Some of you may not know, but going back over 55 years now, makes me feel a bit old. But I was an exchange student just out of Philadelphia where a lot of all this took place. And one of the things I had the opportunity to do was to be the announcer for our school's marching band at football games. So at the start of the afternoon, I'd walk up into the announcer's tower, and then I would say, would everybody please stand for the playing of the national anthem? And you'd look, and all these faces would be turning up and saying, where is this strange voice coming from? And it was only me asking people to stand for the national anthem. But just something that's always stuck with me as I think about that. But interestingly, the conclusion to the fourth and final verse of the national anthem says this: "Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." I think about that, and I think about our own national anthem, and we don't hear the verse that talks about God and expressing faith in Him for us as Australians. Let's fast forward, though, to the year 1861. Does anybody know what 1861 in American history is famous for? It's the start of the American Civil War. The country is in crisis. And there's a man, a banker, Salmon Chase, who was appointed by Abraham Lincoln to be the Secretary of the Treasury. we might be familiar with the Chase Manhattan Bank as it exists today. But Chase wrote on November the 20th, 1861 to the US Mint, suggesting the trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins. And so between 1861 and 1863, God, our trust, and other similar phrases were put on the coins. And then in 1864, the phrase, "In God we trust," was printed first on 2-cent coins and then on all coins and dollar bills. "In God we trust" officially became the national motto of the United States of America on July the 30th, 1956, under President Eisenhower. Now, I hope you don't mind that bit of history, but we often hear and see about these things and just wonder how they've all come to be. I think when we think about "In God we trust," it says something about the depth of religious belief that has been such a strong underlying component of American history since the Pilgrim Fathers in 1620. But while trusting God has been a strength of American life, I would suggest that in recent years we are seeing the result of people turning their back on. And we could probably say it's no different here in Australia. Christian values, upheld beliefs are being undermined in all sorts of manners. And really, when we talk about all the issues that are facing us as a society, my thinking is the one person that can help us, and people aren't turning to him at all. Jesus is there to help, and people need to be reminded of that. Before we look a bit more closely at what it means to trust God, I think it's fitting for me to say one final thing about the American colonies gaining their independence from Britain. For those of you who don't know, and some of you who may have forgotten, when Great Britain had nowhere to send their convicts, they were in strife. What are we going to do? And of course, somebody said, "There's a place called New South Wales. Perhaps we can send them there." And so we find Captain Arthur Phillip and the first fleet arriving in Botany Bay in January 1788. When I think about that phrase, "In God we trust," there seems to me that there is another word that we could possibly use interchangeably with it. Anybody want to have a guess what that might be? Starts with F. Faith. Faith. Faith and trust. Are they the same, or is there a difference between the two? And as I've wrestled with this question, and for some it may seem a bit like splitting hairs, I want to say that there's nothing wrong with using them as synonyms, meaning the same. However, I believe there is a difference. Faith, defined, is a confident belief in the truth, value, or trustworthiness of a person, an idea, or a thing. Reliance or trust. Trust, then, is defined as firm reliance on the integrity, the ability, or the character of a person or thing. It is confident belief or faith. So there's really very little difference between the two. Perhaps I can illustrate it a bit more clearly by sharing this story from the life of the famous American evangelist Gypsy Smith. And it might be that it brings back memories for us as well, as we think about young children and our interacting with our own children or with others. One day, Gypsy Smith picked up his little son, put him on the dining room table, probably at the disgust of his wife. But anyway, he asked his son to walk towards him. The child walked gingerly to the edge of the table, looked at his father, then looked at the distance between the table and where his father was waiting, turned around, walked back and sat down. His father called him again, and again there was the same response. The little boy came so far, turned around and went back. But on the third time he stood up, he shut his eyes and he ran across the table and out into the space where his father's arms held him. For me, faith is the child believing his father's words that he will catch him when he launches himself off the table. Trust is actually taking that leap of faith. Trust, if you like, is a part of faith. Think about the gospel story of Jesus bringing back to life the daughter of the synagogue ruler, of the lady who suffered continual bleeding for 12 years that we read about in Matthew chapter 9. She expressed her faith in Jesus by saying, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." And trusting that Jesus would do what she had hoped for, she reached out and touched him and was healed from that moment. And what was it that Jesus said to her? "Take heart, daughter, your faith has healed you." And this is the message of life for all people today. In our reading from Romans chapter 3, we're told that all of us have sinned. We have fallen short. We have done things that are wrong. But the good news is that God has done something about it, and through his love and his grace, he allowed his one and only Son, the Lord Jesus, to take the punishment for those things that we've done wrong upon himself on the cross that we remembered just a moment in communion. It's possible for all people to know new life through faith in Jesus. The Apostle Paul, writing in Ephesians 2:8, says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves. It's a gift that God has given to us, not by works, lest any of us should boast." But as with any gift, it's either one that we can accept or we can say, "No, thank you." But of course, acceptance or not of this gift has eternal consequences. For those who do say thank you, we have the promise of God that he has done what he said he would, that we can know forgiveness for those things that we have done wrong. And we can continue on in our life's journey knowing that we can trust that God is with us. The highest affirmation we can give another person is to believe their word. When I got my heavy vehicle licence, I came across Truck and Bus magazine that I used to read faithfully and used to enjoy that. And I came across a story one time about Jack McCafferty. Jack McCafferty was the founder of McCafferty Coach Lines in Toowoomba in Queensland. He used to say that his handshake was his word. No need for a contract or anything written down. My word is my bond, and I will stay true to that. To live with such integrity, I believe, instills trust. And it's important that people know, like Jack McCafferty, people could trust us in exactly the same way when we say something or do something. Back in the old days, some of you who lived in Adelaide remember that on the bus tickets there always used to be little sayings. And one that always stuck with me was, "Whatever awaits you, God is already there." to live with this attitude of trust in God helps us to deal with whatever issues are confronting us. Because, as Paul says, I know whom I have believed and am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him for that day. The psalmist wrote, "Those who trust in me will never be disappointed." And then the famous verses from Proverbs 3, 5 and 6 that begin by saying, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths." Wonderful promise of assurance. In God we trust, or to bring it down to a personal level, in God I trust. If this is not your experience this morning, then I would ask you to seriously ask yourself, why not? And if you'd like to do something about it, please talk to me or a Christian friend. By saying yes, and for those who have said yes to Jesus in the course of our lives, we know that we are accepting that gift of life that God makes available to us through our faith and trust in him. To live with such an approach to life provides us with a strong and ongoing sense of assurance. Let me tell you this short story about an elderly Thai lady who had served the Lord faithfully for many, many years, and sadly she was dying, and her pastor dropped in to pay her a visit, and he was a bit taken aback at the joy and the certainty that was in her voice when she talked about being with her Lord forever. And mistaking her faith for false optimism, he urged her to make sure of her place in heaven. And she said to him, "Young man, if I don't get to heaven when I die, all I have to lose is my soul. But if I don't get to heaven, the Lord stands to lose much more. He will lose his name and honour because he has promised to save to the uttermost those who come to him through faith in Jesus Christ. And that I have already done." As the old hymn expresses it, trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. As we each continue on in our life's journey, may the joy of the Lord be ours, because in him we trust. Amen.